Okay, so I'll try and be quick. Hopefully this is a fun talk. It's either fun or it's going to start a huge flame war, so either way it'll be entertaining. And I don't have an answer, but whatever. Hi, I'm Dave. I work for Underscore. I'm here to talk about, as I said, writing Scala without using an IDE. And I'm sure most of you are thinking that this is a pretty crazy prospect at a conference predominantly about tooling. I asked you earlier to put your hands up if you use an IDE, one of these IDEs, as your main Scala dev environment. And of course, nearly everybody.
Thanks.
Hello. All right. Nearly everybody put their hands up, and there are a few stalwart people who are editor users, like myself. I am a Sublime text user. I use that for, thank you, one cheer. I use that for almost all my editing. I'm not here necessarily to talk about Sublime Text as being, better than anything else. I'm not here to say anything bad about IDEs either. I predominantly use it as a creature of habit. So before I was programming Scala, I was programming other languages, and I think IDEs are a very Scala and Java thing, but I brought my kind of history across from other languages. So other editors are available, even if you're slightly eccentric. And I'm here to talk about the experience of not using an IDE to write Scala, and in particular about some of the tools I use to replace IDE-ness. Because writing in an editor is great, they're fast, they're lightweight, there are never any compilation issues or class path issues or anything like that, because they don't do anything. But you lose lots of features that people really like about IDEs. And in fact, I think it's a common belief out there that it's just not feasible to write Scala code without an IDE. So what tools do I use to produce this big ball of twine that's my development environment? I'm going to talk about a few tools. These are all just my opinions. We can agree to disagree, and I'm not intending to try and persuade you away from IDEs. I think that is the de facto way of programming Scala, but hopefully some of the things I talk about will be useful to you in some ways. So let's talk about some tools. The first tool I want to introduce you to it, you may have heard of it, is called the internet. The internet is full of many wondrous things, but it's also a great source for two things that we absolutely need as developers. One is documentation, and the other one, because we're mostly working with open source and documentation doesn't always exist, is source code. So we've got to get hold of that stuff, and we've got to get it into our dev environment. So I do this in a particularly low-tech way. I have a bookmark list. Browsers have bookmarks. They still have bookmarks, even though no one uses them anymore. And the first thing I do with any project I ever want to work with is I go and I bookmark three things. So I bookmark the Scala docs, obviously. I try and get hold of the source code, preferably on a website that supports searching. And heaven forbid, if there's a manual, I try and get hold of that as well. And I'll bookmark them, and I'll give them these prefixes here on the bookmark name. Why? Well, I'll show you that in a minute. So that gives me all my documentation, and I also want to get hold of source code. So I have a big directory where I clone every project I'm interested in, basically. So I have it all there on my hard drive. Yes, Eugene?
How do you keep it updated?
How do I keep it updated? The question is, how do I keep it updated? I periodically go and do a git pull. There's nothing high-tech here.
Everywhere?
No, just on the ones I'm using. Okay, so that gives me all the content I need. Okay, I can use scripts to pull things and stuff like that. That'd be fine. But can I just hold questions to the end, because I've got way too much content. But that brings me, so how do I get hold of that quickly? I need to get hold of it from my editor. So this is the next tool that I use, which I'm going to impress on you all, is an app launcher. Now, I use this thing called Launchbar. Does anyone use Launchbar? No. Does anybody use any of these things if you're a Mac user? Okay, so there's a few hands going up now. It doesn't really matter what you use. These are all app launchers. They're programs that are designed to launch other things on your OS. And if you take one thing away from this talk, go and find one for your OS, one that you like, and learn to use it, because it saves masses of time. So I'm going to give you a demonstration. I'm so glad we could get Keynote working. I'm going to look for applicative in cats. There we go. And notice that Launchbar has indexed my bookmarks there. So all I typed was API cats, which is why I named the bookmark that. And I have that open in Scala doc immediately, right there and then. And I can go and use the shortcut keys within ScalaDoc to just get hold of applicative. That didn't take very long, right? It's not immediate, but it's pretty good. It works in all languages. It works in all editors. That third-party directory that I showed you earlier with all the projects in it is also indexed. So I can go and look for projects by name, and then of course they open up in Sublime and I use my regular search tools to get hold of a class. So I can get hold of the source code and I can dive into it relatively quickly. I can dive into the documentation relatively quickly. And that's all cross-language, and it's all, it doesn't require any special tools. It just requires a bunch of bookmarks and some files on my hard drive. Incidentally, ScalaDoc has keyboard shortcuts. Who knew? Just a few people. They're great. They'll save time. Go see Heather's blog post about them. They're really cool. Okay, so still on the subject of documentation, I've got another tool, and this one's also great. Have any of you heard of a tool called Dash? Okay, so more hands now. This is brilliant. So again, it's a commercial product for OS X. There's an open source version for Windows and Linux called Zeal, and this is great. They're both offline documentation browsers. So they've gone away and taken lots of documentation from websites, things like ScalaDocs, and they've packaged it up so you can just download through the interface zips of these things and cache them on your hard drive. And then they give you a global shortcut key within your OS to look for things. So here I'm working with play.json. I do a search for JS success. So I've highlighted the word, I press a key, and I've got the documentation for JS success here. And I think the video will run, and I'll do a little search for applicatives and narrow it down in ScalaZ and all this kind of stuff. But essentially, I can search for any method, any type, any value, anywhere, or any language, and I can get that in one by highlighting it and pressing one key. So that's a really useful tool, Dash or Zeal, and I thoroughly recommend people to check them out as well. The next tool is a cop-out. Oh yes, I'm showing you here. They can get ScalaDocs and JavaDocs straight off Maven Central, so you don't even need to have the docs pre-prepared for the system. It just gets hold of the library straight away. The next tool is a cop-out. I'm not going to talk about Enzyme in any great detail, but it does give me, for those times when I do want an IDE, when I want code complete, when I actually want some kind of semantic awareness in my editor, which is basically just when I'm exploring new things. Most of the time I don't want it. I don't like red underlines in my code. I don't want the tooling telling me what I'm doing wrong. I want the compiler to do that in intervals when I come to it. But when I do need this stuff, I can go to Enzyme. If you didn't know, Enzyme supports multiple editors, but I have been asked to display the editors in order of open sourceness, in Libra-ness, sorry. So there we go. Sublime is woefully down the bottom there, unfortunately. And I did do a little bit of hacking recently on some of the setup docs for Sublime. So enzyme.org, go grab it, see how you can set it up in your Sublime text environment or Atom or whatever, and hopefully that will work. Okay, I haven't got a timer, but I think I'm about 8 minutes in now. So I want to just talk about two more quick things quickly, and then we can go to coffee. How many of you do source control from within your IDE? Okay, quite a lot. How many of you use a separate graphical application to do your source control? Okay, and how many of you have managed to do that without ever touching the command line? Okay, right. See, I don't understand this. This is I do understand it. Git is a horrible tool, right? It's inconsistent. It's esoteric. It's impossible to find all the different switches to do things. But I managed to do everything I need to do with Git with about 5 commands. I did have a whole bunch of Git tips in here, but I've decided to leave them out. What you lose from using a UI is you lose scriptability and you use extendability. So 2 things that I make use of here. There's a thing called Git flow, which is really useful. It's a branching model for Git. I got a single command to start or commit a feature, like branch out, merge the branch back, merge a hotfix back into development, and I don't mess up my Git branches often, not very often. So that's a really useful tool. Git flow is a great one. And has anyone heard of Hub? I mean, that's been doing the rounds recently. This is a GitHub command line tool that gives you sort of GitHub API type stuff as well as Git stuff. So it wraps up Git, and you can like check out a PR in one command. You can create a new GitHub repository without touching the website and things like that. And those kind of things, of course, are only available from the command line. So they're really useful. As I say, I was going to do some Git tips stuff and do a quiz with you, but I don't have time. So I found a blog post that says everything I was going to say, so that's a useful thing. And I think really the same is true For SBT, I'm sure I'm not using that logo correctly. But once again, you know, I'm a believer in running things on the command line and compiling things on the command line. I'm going to presume you all know a lot more about SBT than I do. We have a nice little blog post by my colleague Richard with some cool tips you might want to know. How to prevent Control-C quitting SBT. That's one of them I like. So there's a few gems in there for those of you taking screenshots. And you can recreate a lot of sort of IDE or editor functionality judiciously with plugins. Sam mentioned SBT header. Obviously ScalaSphere, Scoverage. Here's some ones I like. I use a dependency graph to work out which library was still requiring an old version of ScalaZ the other day, because you can query it to say what's using this version of this jar file and weed out your old dependencies. And so with judicious use of plugins, you can get a lot of this tooling without having to use an IDE. Okay, that's more or less it. So I think I've gone through a few things there. I think I have a relatively good solution for getting documentation, source code. I could definitely get to it. You could argue that it's not as slick. And I talked a little bit about build and version control there. Obviously, I don't have debugging. I don't have refactoring. Those are the sort of things that I'd lean on Enzyme for. Or indeed lean on something like IntelliJ or Scala IDE for. So it's not a perfect solution, but those are some tools which hopefully you can use at least in your non-Scala development to give you IDE-like features without an IDE. So thanks very much.